Welcome to Weights and Measures, Fortis 2024 election webinar. My name is Jason Allen, and I have the privilege of serving at Fortis Institute as Director of Fellows. And we're going to jump right in tonight to discuss this upcoming election. You know, there's a fracturing of the evangelical vote. Some are voting for Trump, others are sitting this one out, and still others are going to be voting for Harris. We have all arrived at our convictions because of how we have weighed the candidates and issues. Whether consciously or not, we have ascribed weights and measures to the candidates based on their character and positions. Somehow, in doing so, we've come to conclude that one candidate outweighs the other, thus making it tenable for us to vote for them. So our aim tonight is to help you as an evangelical assess your weights and measures and come to the most biblical conclusion for yourself. And to help us do that, we have a couple of our Fortis fellows with us tonight and a special guest. Let me begin by introducing Dr. Andrew Walker. He is a Fortis fellow. He serves as Associate Dean in the School of Theology and Associate Professor of Christian Ethics and Public Theology at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. Dr. Walker is married to Christian, and they have 3 children. Dr. Tom Buck serves as the Senior Pastor of First Baptist Church, Lindale, Texas, and is the Director of G3 Conferences Expository Workshops. He's married to Jennifer, and they have 3 children as well. And then Todd Friel serves as the Executive Director of Fortis Institute. He is host of Wretched TV and Wretched Radio. And Todd is also pastor elder at Alpharetta Bible Church in Alpharetta, Georgia. And Todd is married to Susan, and they have 3 adult children. Well, I want to take care of a little housekeeping before we jump in tonight. What you will see tonight is the interaction of 3 men who love one another in the Lord and who have the utmost respect for each other. We're going to model Christian charity, even though there are some differences with respect to convictions. And we would ask that you would extend the same Christian charity in the chat feature that you might be participating in tonight. Additionally, you will have the opportunity to submit questions to the panelists during our time together this evening. Please leave your name when leaving a question, and we will get to as many of those as time allows. And we would ask also here that your questions evidence the same charity that our panelists will be showing each other. All right. Well, Todd, I'm going to start with you. Why did Fortis Institute decide to name this webinar Weights and Measures?
Well, first of all, I have to express my agitation at Andrew Walker. I thought I was doing well with my Masters Academy International tie, and he bow ties us to look smarter than everybody on the webinar. Thanks, Andrew. And Tom Buck, I didn't know you were a doctor. Is that like chiropractor or something? Okay, to the question at hand, we thought that maybe the concept of weights and measures might guide the entire conversation because that's what we all do. We weigh and measure the issues. The phrase actually is an old English term. It's a couple of words that got smashed together. It had to do with balancing and weighing a physical object, but it became a metaphor that symbolized the considering, the evaluating of something carefully. So it's a thoughtful, it's a thorough judgment to weigh an issue. And we even see the Bible, I think, hint at this in Matthew 23:23. Jesus, he's woeing the Pharisees 7 times. He woes them in Matthew 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin. That's something that is lawful that you should do. And then Jesus scolds them, and you've neglected the weightier matters of the law. And he lists 3, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These, the big things, you ought to have done without neglecting the other things. So Jesus, while excoriating them for their priorities, gives us an example that there are some issues that are just weightier. Not everything is the same. The challenge, of course, is when it comes to complex issues, how do you weigh things? How do you go about the business of making sure that your scale is correct and that your weight system is actually accurate? And I've identified 4 challenges, and I offer these. This is not, by the way, an introduction to try to encourage or to think about somebody that I disagree with. I just see that these are the 4 challenges that we all have in weighing and measuring an issue. The first challenge would be my scale. Is it adjusted correctly? And usually the truth of the matter is, this goes for me, this goes for everybody, maybe not for guys who wear bow ties, but for most of us, our scales are imbalanced because of things like, for instance, this is what we bring to the party. These are some of our pre-understandings, not our presuppositions, but just our attitudes. So we're going to talk about the 2024 election, but some of us have certain attitudes about politics and politicians than other people. So for instance, if you're one who does not consume a lot of social media on political issues, you're probably not as, animated about this subject as somebody who does. It's just That's just a different calibration on your scale. Another attitude that we can bring to weighing and measuring is the importance of church and state. There are going to be some evangelicals who they quite honestly don't care much, if at all, about what the government is doing. They're just consumed by the church, probably their local church. You, on the other hand, might be like, hey, don't you get it? Politics, it's really, it kind of affects us all. Get in the game, brother. My point is not to say who's right or wrong. My point is that's how we approach issues. Our scales out of the gate are calibrated differently. And I think that we need to be mindful of that, not to give somebody a pass if you think they're blatantly wrong, but to at least understand, okay, other people, they've got a different system, a different measuring system than I have. And I don't need to give them a pass, but I need to recognize it. Here's our second challenges. Our weights can be false. So for instance, a category confusion where we confuse things like the person and what they're like. Are they a dignified person? Are they noble? Are they honest? Are they a scoundrel? So there's that weight system. But then there's also policies, because the policies, sometimes they're connected, but sometimes they're separated from the person. And then you got preferences. There's just some people you like more than others. This person agitates me. I kind of like the way that person comports him or herself. So right away, what do we see? We just have different weights. Some people, they recognize some policies way more than other policies. I personally believe that they do. For instance, I think that there's tier 1 weights. These are the big issues like abortion, marriage, gender. I think we all agree those are like, whoa, those are litmus issues. But then there's tier 2 issues. Things like religious liberty, that's a big deal, but I don't think it's tier 1. Uh-oh, you think it's tier 1. Oh, look at the argument we're going to have, because we simply disagree on how big these weights are. Tier 2 would be economy, perhaps military, deficits, police funding. So it depends on where we put these issues. My point in this is to simply recognize that entering into the conversation with another believer, we need to recognize we are not all calibrated and we're not all weighing things the same. Hence, the differences of opinion. And this is not trying to say that evangelicals should be voting for Harris. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we need to recognize that we come into it viewing issues differently than others. Here's the third challenge. You got some nebulous weights that I think weigh in our decision-making process. This is 2024. It's not 1984. And that means time is different. Circumstances are different. There's a third nebulous weight. Political realities. How do you feel about the makeup of Congress? What do you think the next House is going to look like? How much can we actually get done? Will this issue be a winner? So we're just weighing some nebulous weights. The fourth and final challenging area is weighing logic, how we go about the business of individually processing how we come to a conclusion. So, for instance, some people are going to feel very strongly about the subject of voting for the lesser of two evils. Some are like, I can't vote for either evil. Other people are going to be like, well, it's better to vote for somebody less evil than more evil. And if we don't even have that straight, it just creates an awful lot of potential volatility. Are you sinning by voting for somebody that you don't believe has a lot of character? Somebody you're like, doesn't matter to me. We're not electing a pastor, we're electing a politician. Other people see it differently. That's like, no, I want the person to have some integrity. It actually matters. Is a non-vote of the less evil candidate a vote for the more evil candidate? How do you feel about that? Your spouse might think something slightly different. What about pragmatism and consequentialism, political prognostication? Hey, if we vote for this guy this time, then this could happen in 2 years. And then maybe in the next presidential election, then we'll have somebody who's really good. How do you feel about those issues? That is only to point out that this conversation is going to try to address those four different areas of potential contention and weigh things carefully and discuss why it is that each of these fellows maybe weighs things and has come up with a different conclusion. So to close, I think each of us, if my preamble is accurate, I think there's two questions that we can and should ask ourselves. One, do I have a sound system of weights and measures? These issues are complex. Anybody who suggests that deciding in this time, it maybe was easier when it was Millard Fillmore, things were perhaps simpler, probably not to those people, but let's just say that it was. These are complex issues today. A lot go. So I need to make sure I'm weighing and measuring correctly. So I'm going to be listening carefully to these two guys too, because I think they're both smart and I think they're both brothers. So I want to let them sharpen me. Second question, do I appreciate how other sound and wise believers might weigh things differently? Can I at least appreciate, okay, we've come to a different conclusion on this, but I don't think you're a raging heretic and we can have fellowship with one another. Can we ask and answer those questions as we now proceed with the 2024 election weights and measures?
So Andrew and Tom, would you add to or correct anything that Todd just offered?
No, let's move on. Move on.
No, I think what Todd laid out there was terrific. And I think one of the most important things that we as believers can do is to actually think conscientiously about why we're voting the way that we are. One of the things I'm most urgent about is Christians thinking not simply at the level of candidate and platform and policy, but thinking at the level of first principles, thinking about what are we doing in this thing called statecraft? What is the purpose of statecraft and the sovereignty of God that we see in Scripture? So we need to lay down those what I would call kind of foundational pillar level first principle questions, and then to build off of that. But I think what Todd did there is exactly right, is to establish everyone is coming at their political calculations using unique weights and measures. What we are after and what we all need to self-examine and do is to examine whether our weights and measures are properly calibrated according to Scripture.
Hey, Jason, could I jump in and ask a question? And if I'm jumping the gun, Andrew, you said we want to establish first principles as our foundation. What do you think what are those first principles?
Well, so I mean, to go to zero out perhaps at the most abstract. something I've been thinking a lot about lately, and this doesn't even immediately sound eminently political, but it's going to have political kind of consequence, is in Scripture, one of the things we see that's right out of the gate in Genesis chapter 1 is a creator creature distinction. So there's an acknowledgement that we are not God. And so already that has political implications for how the various platforms and candidates understand their own sovereignty, understand their own so-called omnicompetence. So if you have politicians who don't recognize a Lord above, what are they prone to do? They're prone to take upon themselves a type of sovereignty, a type of sovereignty that's going to produce some type of idea of truth. That truth is going to have dramatic political consequences on how we understand the nature and shape of our political freedom. So I want to know, you know, talking to or hearing from a candidate, do you think that you are a self-sovereign, or do you understand that you are a creature underneath the sovereign authority of a creator? Because already out of the gate, that's going to tell me a lot about that person's metaphysical commitments. Thomas Sowell, a non-Christian political philosopher, said, really, as we approach politics, there are really two options on offer. There's a constrained understanding of the universe, or an unconstrained understanding of the universe. And a constrained understanding of the universe means that you believe that there is order and purpose and design to the universe. If you believe in an unconstrained understanding of the universe, you believe morality is self-constructed. It's something that is developed from the bottom up rather than the top down. And one of the things that is so important for us is to understand that metaphysical commitments shape our moral commitments, which shape our political commitments. And so that's just one principle, Todd, that I could speak of. In the interest of time, I'll stop right there. But we need, as believers, to zero out before we get to the abortion question. And we absolutely have to think about the abortion question. We have to ask the question, why would a candidate even think that abortion is tenable? By what standard are they arriving at the idea that it's a positive political good to kill unborn life?
Tom Buck, let's hear from you. Anything you would add?
No, I think all of that's helpful, and I agree with it. Appreciate what Andrew said. The only thing I would add is that we need to do everything we can to be hearing one another, listening to one another, rather than just constantly speaking in an echo chamber, which seems to be often what happens, especially as we get closer to election. And so I'm not even trying to necessarily convince someone to share the view that I have. I'm more concerned about what's driving someone's view, what's shaping them in how they're thinking about this in the whole process. So I'm looking forward to tonight.
Great. Well, we are going to talk about each other's views here just a little bit, but before we go there, let's talk about evangelicals for Harris. One pastor who has been outspoken in his upcoming vote for Harris is quoted as saying, and I quote, "Abortion is a horrible evil, but the evils on the other side have risen to levels that jeopardize the foundational rule of law in our country. I'm thinking long term," he continues, "and voting for us to have a chance at national renewal in the future," end quote. This pastor has ascribed certain weights and measures to the two candidates and has determined that a vote for Harris is the best use of his vote. He says he's pro-life, but he's come to a different conclusion than evangelicals that will vote for Trump. So, Tom, let me go back to you. How is this pastor weighing the issues wrongly?
Well, I don't think there's any moral equivalency between Harris and Trump when it comes to what I think are significant, important issues, the pro-life issues, gender issues, even some of the things regarding marriage, maybe. But I mean, Harris is profoundly more liberal. And although Trump has sadly said that he won't sign a bill that would ban abortion if he had the opportunity, Harris has been clear that she's going to work to get the opportunity to make abortion to be legal from coast to coast. So she sees the murder of the unborn as a right. I mean, that's the word that they use for abortion. She and Waltz Waltz refused to say how far along in a pregnancy is okay to have an abortion, but we know that where Wall stands regarding how he governed would go all the way up until till birth, and some, have argued that even after the child is born, that they allow for the doctor to not give care. So where I think that one of the biggest areas I think that someone like that's making a mistake, because he talks about rule of law, and they seem to be obviously referencing some of the things that Trump did and actions that he took that they believe were a violation or a threat to law in our country. Genesis 9 is what informs me as to what's foundational for human government. In fact, the first law that God gave for governing mankind in Genesis 9 was to respect life and protect life. And from Genesis 9:5 says that from every man, from each man's brother, I will require the life of man, and whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. And there he speaks, for he's in the image of God made of man. So it's the foundation. Respect for life and protecting life is the foundation upon which a society must be built. And after the fall and man was expelled from the garden, the dominating sin from Genesis 4 up until the flood in Genesis 6 was murder. Violence and murder, as you open up chapter 6, filled the land. So when Noah exits the ark, what does God establish? He establishes the foundation for government in the world to respect life. So someone who doesn't value, especially the life of the most vulnerable, I don't think is fit to govern. Definitely is questionable whether they can govern. So if you really care about the rule of law, you care about the foundation of all law that starts with respecting and protecting life.
So, Andrew, how should we respond to someone who says they're pro-life, but they are voting for Harris?
I mean, I think that is, I want to be respectful, but I also want to have the freedom to speak in morally stark terms. I think that is just tremendously naive. Because when you understand that the modern Democratic Party is not the party of Bill Clinton, which had the language of safe, legal, and rare, which still had the idea that abortion is a regrettable situation. There was still this idea of stigma around abortion in the 90s. That is simply not where the modern Democratic Party is. Tom is right. There is no moral equivalence, and none of us here are going to carry water for the errors that Donald Trump and the Republican platform have made on these concessions. At the same time, just because the right has made problematic concessions, it doesn't mean that there's moral symmetry between the two parties. Just this week, Kamala Harris went on a very popular podcast called Call Her Daddy, and she bragged about the fact that she was the first president or vice president to visit a functioning abortion clinic. We should sit and dwell upon that. This is what Tom is getting at front and center, is the idea that, right out of the gate in Genesis chapter 1, there are these necessary pillars that comprise human existence, issues of human nature, human purpose, human freedom. If we cannot establish out of the gate that there is an inherent right to life, to me, that's a disqualifying feature that says that the person has fundamentally misunderstood what their calling is as a governing official. And it misunderstands the extent to which not only is the figurehead of the Democratic Party committed to abortion, like Kamala Harris is, it's that this is going to be an administration staffed with 4,000 political appointees that are going to use the tentacles of the law to reach into every area of federal law, and will do what they can to reach into areas of state law where they can, to bring about an abortion regime. So I understand that there can be a multitude or a constellation of factors that are informing people's political calculations, but think about what's most important. Genesis chapter 1 is speaking about life. Christ is referred to as the author of life in Acts chapter 3. And I think that we need to understand that there is a basic moral minimum threshold, which is the idea that human beings are made in the image of their creator and they have a natural right to life. If they can't figure that out, that's a disqualifying reality.
Friel, let me come back to you. So why do you think evangelicals for Harris are misweighing the issues?
Well, to go back to the opening speaker that you had that talked about weights and measures, I thought he was excellent, by the way.
He was, yeah.
Okay. Would you please read the statement of the aforementioned pastor who's an evangelical for Harris, specifically the part that says that basically the Republicans are now jeopardizing what was the quote exactly?
Yeah, the foundational rule of law in our country.
Okay, all right. I think where he's off in the weights and measures is that's consequentialism. So it's seeing what potential bad could come from Donald Trump as being so bad. Therefore, I can't vote for him. So it's kind of playing prognosticator of what could potentially happen in the future, as opposed to weighing the policies. And I think that's another one of the weights that's off here. The difference between personality. I wonder if this pastor, if he thinks that the jeopardizing comes from the terrible boorish behavior of Donald Trump and all of the mean tweets and the things that he says, etc. Okay, that's personality, and that's important, but how important is it compared to the actual policies? And how much more important is it to focus on the actual policies versus what you think might be the consequences of voting for that person? So I just think the weights and measures are just, I don't think that they're being thoughtfully constructed.
Jason, can I add something to this real quick?
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, obviously, concerns about the rule of law and the peaceful transfer of power are absolutely paramount as we think about our voting. And the pastor who you've quoted is concerned about the questions of the very foundations of liberal democracy. And those are valid concerns to have. But one of these issues of weights and measures should be a principle of consistency and a principle of non-contradiction. And so this accusation is made that the Republicans are a threat to democracy. Okay, well, ask yourself, is that actually consistent with what we know of the Democrats today? We have a Democratic Party right now that installed a nominee who never received a single primary vote, doesn't seem very democratic, who basically ran a peaceful coup against a sitting president, doesn't seem very democratic, wants to eliminate the filibuster, doesn't seem very democratic, wants to pack the Supreme Court, that doesn't seem very democratic. And then just this week, Tim Walz, the potential vice presidential candidate, called for the abolition of the Electoral College. Guess what? That's not very democratic either. So I would just simply want to remind people who are making these accusations to ask whether your own side is not guilty of this as well.
But Andrew, though, it's interesting because let's just give the benefit of the doubt and say, yeah, we get that. There's got to be something then that tips their scale, because to make the concession that this guy is so bad, I'm going to vote for the aggressive pro-abort who does have, I'm not sure I'm a fan of democratic policies, but we'll use that term, that they see that, but they still go, nope, she's the better choice. Guys, both of you, all three of you for that matter, what's the blindness? What's the confusion there?
I think for a lot of these guys, it's January 6th. And I think Andrew alluded to that we do care about peaceful transition of power and all of that. But I believe they think that Trump incited certain things that led to the breaking of the law. And I think that they see him as a threat, and they believe that if he gets in, that he's capable of doing anything. That's the kind of rhetoric that I've heard.
So that's like a boulder. Sure, she maybe wants to pack the court, but this was so big, I can't see past it.
I think that's true for a lot of these guys.
Right. And I echo what Tom says. One of my friends likes to use the phrase that every accusation is a confession. And I love that phrase. And I have no interest in defending what happened on January 6th. It was atrocious and a reprehensible day on our nation's history. It was awful. But then ask yourself, like, are there other moments where the other side have called into question the legitimacy of our democracy? Yes. When Trump won in 2016, you had celebrities basically calling for not certifying the Electoral College. You have Stacey Abrams when she lost in Georgia, basically saying that she really did win and she was contesting the election. I just would want to remind people that we can play the tit for tat gotcha game on both sides if we really want to.
Before I move on to y'all's personal positions, let me just ask, would any of you be willing to say it's a sin to vote for Harris?
I would.
Well, I'll jump. Go ahead.
Go
Tom.
ahead. No, you go ahead. I'll let you take it.
So I guess I'll be the first person to make controversial statements. So I would say that depending on the reason why you would be voting for Kamala Harris, it could be sinful. So if you are a Christian and espouses to have an evangelical born again faith and is submitting to the Lord Jesus, and you say to yourself, I'm voting for Kamala Harris because I support her views on abortion, that is incongruent with being a follower of Jesus Christ. That would be an occasion for church discipline in my account. I do, though, have a category for someone who I would say is acting ignorantly and acting without full knowledge of what they're doing. There could be a naivete. So I would not be prepared to bring that person under church discipline. I would want to have a loving conversation that asks the question, do you understand the political terms of this election? First and foremost, what does this person support? Secondly, do you understand what your vote is? Your vote is not just a symbolic action. It's using your agency to install people to use their power for particular ends. One of the moral red lines I have is I can't vote for someone who I think is going to further expand abortion access. So I think those are some of the categories I would think through with a person like this. Tom, what do you think?
I agree 100% with what you're saying, because I believe there would be, if it's promoting to transgender rights, if it's for the reasons of supporting abortion, that it would be a sin and could even be taken to the level of church discipline. I agree that there's a lot of ignorance and on some people's parts, and some will say, "Well, how can anybody be ignorant today?" I think people can, particularly if they're not plugged into certain venues that are explaining what's going on in the culture. Something that is going on out behind me, and I have no idea what it is. I hope y'all don't hear that. But I would say, although in addition to that, I would want to say that I think that it's possible for someone to vote for Trump and it be a sin, depending on the basis of why they're voting for him. If they're voting and okay with abortion as long as they get cheaper gas prices as a Christian, that would be sinful. So I don't think it's just one-sided, although I think it's more clearly one-sided when it comes to the issue of Harris.
Right.
The only thing that I would add to that is maybe to just a broadening of the number of people. Now, I don't know that I call people that they have naivete, but they are naive. Thanks for the fancy word, Andrew. I think a lot of people, they're maybe steeped in tradition. They never hear the other side. They never take the time to actually weigh the issues. Their whole family has voted that way. They were a union family their whole life. That's just what we do. I think that there is a considerable amount of ignorance, but for those in the know who understand what abortion is, that could be another, I think, factor that needs to be considered. Do you know what abortion is? Because if they're still under the delusion that it's no different than removing a blob of tissue like a mole from your elbow, you understand that this is the intentional dismembering of a whole innocent human being, and you vote for more of that. I think there's a complicit nature in that would put it on the side of, I don't know how you couldn't say that you weren't sinning in voting in that direction.
Tom, we're going to turn personally here, and I just want to ask you specifically at this point, and we're going to get to the others here in just a moment, but for you, what are you going to do with your vote in November?
Well, I'm deeply conflicted because I know that, Harris intends to use her power to accomplish all kinds of evil. I believe she's going to probably work to squelch religious freedom. She's told us what she's going to attempt to do in certain areas, like abortion that we've already talked about. So I'm obviously not going to vote for her, but I am presently intending not to vote for Trump, but to write in a name. I'm not going to avoid voting, especially in the down ballot. And if somebody asks me what my confidence level in that is, it's probably about a 6 or a 7 right now. So I'm not at a 10 on that. But I'm weighing my decision on the fact that Trump abandoned a firm pro-life position. That affected how I thought about him in 2016. It then affected about how I thought about him in 2020 because he surprised me regarding some of those things. But you've had a shift in him, at least it appears to be, although I think now that what he seems to think is by taking abortion off of the discussion at the federal level will actually be beneficial to the Republicans winning. But then you have the shift in the Republican Party platform to take out firm anti-abortion language and even taking out the language regarding what we would consider to be biblical marriage. So I'm looking at this from the standpoint of I don't see Trump as a pro-life candidate that I would, speaking about it and how I would like to see that. I believe if he wins the election and that he and those close to him will control the Republican Party for years. We see the kind of control that, Obama has after 8 years in office. The same thing with Clinton. Pro-life evangelicals, I think they've made it clear that we'll be making it clear to them that the Republican Party has our vote, even if they abandon pro-life causes. I just don't think where I feel at this point is we shouldn't allow them to think that they have our vote no matter what. And the distance between the two evils is growing ever smaller and less distinguishable, although it certainly is still a chasm, it seems, to one degree or another. But I fear that Trump's coalition that wants to take the issue of abortion out of the discussion of federal elections is eerily similar to what happened in Canada, and it's proven to be disastrous there. So let me just briefly say that about that. There's a lot of history behind it, but Stockwell Day was a social conservative because Canada had in their social party, they were split where they had a fiscally conservative and socially conservative party, and then the Liberal Party. And the conservatives together, fiscally and socially, always had more votes than the Liberal Party, but they would lose because their votes would be split. And so Harper came along around, I think, the 2000 election and formed a Canadian alliance where that he was able to successfully merge the two conservative parties to unite the right. And the thing that they felt was dragging them down was the issue of abortion. And the very first policy convention that they had after this merger, they dropped any policy around abortion. That was in 2005. And then when the government was formed by Harper in 2006, he made it known that he wasn't going to make abortion an issue. And so many, although they do allow for conservatives to put forth pro-life bills, they'll put them forth, but they'll be squelched very, very quickly. They felt like the social issues was what was holding them back, that if they could get that out of the discussion, that then they could win in the conservative party. And what I've been told by leaders up there is that abortion was seen as too divisive, and there became such fatigue from the Liberal Party winning and having such liberal policies that they were willing to concede on the issue of abortion to get the liberals out. And so I fear the same thing is happening here, potentially the same type of thing. And by Trump doing that, it may be that we are just become like Canada, and we're not able to regain the ground on this. And so I think that Trump's coalition is dangerous. I think it could be even disastrous. And I would rather tell the Republican Party, hey, we're sending you a message. You need to shift back to a conservative position, or we're not going with you on this.
Andrew, what are your plans for your vote next month?
Yeah, I want to respond back to Tom so bad, but I'll keep my my statements focused here. Um,
And feel
so
free to.
We'll have time for that in just a little bit.
okay, so I would say so I'm going to vote for Trump. Um, I, all cards on the table. I was a DeSantis supporter in the primaries, but I will vote for Trump. But I would say this: that between the character issues and the defining down of issues that are of utmost importance to me, I would put my enthusiasm at a 4 or a 5. I'm not a 1 because I think that there are very good reasons to support Trump up against Kamala Harris. So I think there are clear differentiating factors to consider here. But I'm not a 10 because I have to have the intellectual and theological integrity to admit that we're dealing with a deeply compromised candidate and a compromised platform. But one of the reasons I would say I'm doing what I'm doing is, and I've worked in public policy circles at the Heritage Foundation and then in other organizations as well. And so I've kind of had an upfront vantage point to see how kind of politics works at the granular level. Um, those who show up at the table and make the argument, even in odd coalitions, I think maintain a seat at the table. And I think the idea that if Trump takes the party in the direction he wants to take the party, it's going to put the pro-life issue on the back burner for the next generations. I think that is exercising too much like certainty and too much forecasting, when in reality there are like counter realities to consider. The first and foremost, that the Republican Party is still very pro-life. Yeah, the platform got weakened. The sitting or the current nominee for president is not super clear on the issue. In fact, to be honest with you all, I don't even really know what Donald Trump believes on abortion. I don't think he actually knows what he believes on abortion, because I think a lot of the posturing that's coming out of the Republican Party right now is basically either half truths or lies in order to play down the issue in order to get elected. But when you look at the states, you've got individuals like Ron DeSantis, you got people like Brian Kemp, who are very conservative and passing pro-life measures, and they've been very successful. So I think it's possible to overread the significance of Donald Trump's impact on the Republican Party, because again, knowing how these things work in Washington, the pro-life groups, of which there are dozens, are not going anywhere. It's not as though on November 6th, if he wins or loses, these groups are closing up their shops and they're going to have no further relevance. The Trump campaign just last week said, or JD Vance announced, that they would not fund Planned Parenthood. Now, like, that should not just be the minimum thing that gets us excited. We should be continually calling for more and more strident devotion to the cause of the unborn. But all that to say, even where there are problems in the Republican Party, they still pale in comparison to the Democratic Party, which I think has basically just declared war on the entire worldview of Genesis chapter 1.
So, Todd, you're voting for Trump, who's non-pro-life. You've never voted for a non-pro-life candidate before. Are you being inconsistent? I ask that in love.
It feels like it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I think I would hearken back to not as heavy of a weight, but nevertheless, time, circumstances, political realities. I don't think our considerations are the same as they once were. Now, you can argue with that, certainly, but I recall, say, 20, 25 years ago, when we were talking about these very same issues on the radio, life was a litmus test issue. That's it. I don't need to look at your economic policies. I don't care about your military budget. I don't care how many shovel-ready jobs that you purport to create in the future. If you're not pro-life, we're not voting. Well, we don't have that now. So I just need to rethink the issues. And so I come down on voting for Trump really for a couple of reasons. And one would be the lessening of evil principle. one of them is going to win. So which one will do the least damage? I think that still has some value. And I think the second consideration for me is, rather than considering what the political repercussions might be, I'm more inclined to just take a look at the policies dealing with what we've got right now. This is what we have. And then the way that I view affecting change would be, okay, let's deal with what we've got now. Let's do the thing that lessens evil, and then we'll make efforts to try to bring people back to a more pro-life position. And I guess there would be a third reason that I lean that direction. I don't lean. I'm there. I'm voting for Trump. I'm probably not going to go to a rally, but I'm going to vote for him because I do think now, and this is going to sound inconsistent, I know it because I actually feel it, there are now other considerations in addition to the life issue. I talked about tier 1, tier 2. So I think there's even tier 1 issues like the gender reassignment surgeries for children and the government paying for it, and the attitude toward marriage. Those are now they're big issues too. But I also think even some of the tier 2 issues, we can't ignore them anymore. Historically, I wouldn't consider them if you weren't pro-life. Well, now we don't have that option. So now I am considering them because, for instance, if religious liberties are compromised, there's not going to be a table for us to sit at. We're not going to be able to do things like this, potentially. I think also economic issues now can't be overlooked for the sake of human flourishing. I don't mean that in a liberal way, but I do mean that when an economy is better, hey, people do better. They can buy a home, they can advance, they can start to create generational wealth. So I don't think those things we just brush all of those aside because we are focusing as intensely as we are on what used to be our singular litmus test issue. I don't know if that passes a smell test or not.
So, Andrew, let's get back to you. A minute ago, you wanted to respond to Tom. So what would you say to persuade him to change his mind?
We all know that Tom is a highly persuadable person, right?
That's right.
So I mean, I laid
Now
out.
you know that I actually am. Go ahead.
You are a good guy. Yes. No. So I mean, I laid out some of what I was going to say, but let me just go back to one example that I can think of. This Amendment 4 issue in Florida right now. This was probably 3 weeks or a month ago on like a Wednesday or a Thursday. Trump kind of signaled that he was going to vote against Amendment 4. And that is a very ghastly amendment that basically guarantees abortion at all stages of the pregnancy. He said that, and it was met with stiff opposition. And you know from who? From pro-lifers and from Christians. And I have an acquaintance of mine who is kind of in the Trump campaign orbit. And I reached out to this individual and I said, I need you to know that this was really, really dispiriting. And I think the Trump campaign is really at the risk of alienating a very important constituency. Now, listen, it wasn't my singular contact with this individual that I'm sure changed Donald Trump's mind. I wish that were the case. I assure you it is most likely not the case. But what did you see on social media after Trump made those awful statements? You saw an outpouring of criticism. The idea that evangelicals and pro-lifers are just a bunch of bootlickers who will do whatever the president says is simply not the case. The president said something stupid. Pro-lifers responded back forcefully. And then what happened the next day? The next day, he reversed course and recognized, oh gosh, maybe he wasn't as informed about Amendment 4 as he should have been. He learned how grisly and terrible this policy is, this referendum is in Florida, and he reversed course. And then in the meantime, because he is one of the few people who can use unvarnished language very effectively, he basically said in this interview, I learned that this Amendment 4 would basically allow for the execution of babies. They want to execute babies. And I was struck by how like that morally stark language of, we sanitize abortion with the language of eliminating a pregnancy, terminating a pregnancy. No, what is it? It's a form of execution. It's just execution of the living in the womb. And Trump comes out and basically says, yeah, this would allow for the execution of children. Again, listen, Trump is far, far, far from perfect on these issues. But what I would appeal to fellow believers and pro-lifers is you have to continue to show up and make the argument, because if we simply kind of tuck tail and run, we're going to show ourselves of being no use whatsoever. And as one of my former bosses used to say, silence never wins. And so I think what we have to think about right now as Christians is, for the last 50 years, we've operated in very clear zero-sum categories where the Democrats are the pro-abortion party and the Republicans the pro-life party. Now it seems that the Republicans are on the verge of becoming kind of mildly a pro-choice party. And we have to be able to say simultaneously, they're wrong. They are absolutely wrong on this issue. But as of right now, they're really the only political coalition that pro-lifers can find themselves having any room at all within to participate. Because guess what? There is no room for pro-lifers in the Democratic Party anymore. And that's lamentable, but it's simply a fact. And so I think we just have to continue to making the argument regardless of the circumstances.
Tom, are you persuaded?
Well, I mean, I'm persuaded. I'm persuaded in the sense that we need to keep making the argument. The question is the only way that we make the argument of voting for Trump and then making the argument. Whether I vote for Trump or not, I'm going to continue to make the argument loudly regarding that. And yes, Trump did say that, use the language executing babies, but that's because he believes the final trimester, the few weeks before, is what he stands against. In fact, just recently, one of his own close individuals in the media that adores him said that his position is more Bill Clinton, and he used the phrase safe, legal, rare, and early. And so I guess my heart's extremely disturbed about it. I get the whole thing about a seat at the table, but if they can't win without us, I wish there was a coalition that would form to say, listen, we're not going to support you. I understand that's probably not realistic. That's why I'm conflicted. That's why I'm at a 6 or a 7 in that. And if Trump were speaking publicly in a way against abortion like he did a few years ago, even regarding women needing to be held accountable, I would feel differently about that. But I don't trust him, and I don't trust him on the abortion issue, and I don't trust him on other issues as well. And we haven't even touched the surface of IVF. And Andrew, I know you know more about that than I do, even regarding what the implications of that is. And Trump's position on IVF and his position on the abortion pill, it's going to have an explosion on the number of the murder of babies as well. And so that's why I say I'm conflicted, but I totally understand what you're saying, that it puts us out of the table, away from a seat at the table.
Todd,
Jason, can I
add to what?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew. That's fine.
Well, I know we're running short on time. I would want to add one other thing, because I think it's important as far as those weights and measures are concerned. It's very typical to want to focus on the figurehead, the candidate themselves, and obviously that's something that we can't deny the importance of, because they're the symbolic figurehead. At the same time, there's 4,000 political appointees. You have to ask the question, who is a potential Trump administration going to be installing into all of these bureaucratic tiers? I have friends of mine who served in the first administration and the Trump administration. If Trump wins again, a lot of those same individuals are going to go back in the administration, and they're going to be in even higher levels of influence and power. And guess what? Those individuals are not going to be pushing any pro-choice, pro-abortion policies. So I think we have to broaden out and recognize that at the level of not just the presidency, but at the cabinet, at the agencies, where policy really gets done often is at these political appointee levels. And even with the Republican Party making these concessions, A Trump administration is not, I think, going to be staffed with a bunch of rabid pro-abortion individuals.
That's a strongly compelling argument, Andrew.
Todd, anything you would add to what Andrew said?
Well, I think that if I were going to say engage with my brother Tom, and try to make the case, I might make 2 points, and first one is going to sound like I'm actually not making the second point consistently. I'm not sure that the current position of the Republican Party and of former President Trump is mildly pro-abortion. It is a reality. 90% of abortions do happen in the first trimester, and he's a 15-week guy, and that means some babies will be saved, but not nearly the number that we want them all to live. So it's not like it's a stark distinction in my mind with 15 weeks and 40 weeks with the Democrats. Now, having said that, for all of those aforementioned reasons, judges, etc., the way that I would try to potentially persuade Tom would be to say, without weighing the future repercussions of the election, whether we have a seat at the table, we have a voice, what this is going to do to the life movement, what this will do to the Republican Party, I think about the baby that would be saved, the baby's life. And I think about the babies' lives who wouldn't be saved if we voted for somebody like just a very aggressive pro-abort candidate like Kamala Harris. So I don't look out in the future as much and weigh that as heavily. I just think about today. I'm convinced that more babies will die under Kamala Harris. And I have every expectation I'm going to meet those babies in heaven. And I think that I would be hard pressed to explain to them why I didn't vote for a chance to save their life because of some political prognostication of what might happen in the future. So I just look at it very immediately, and I just think about the lives. I think about the little kids that are going to be mutilated at the age of 8. I think about even the adults that are going to be mutilated. And I just think about those people. And I ask the question, who's going to protect them more? Who's going to save more? And that's why I can't not vote. I'm going to vote for the guy who's going to save the most lives.
Well, we're drawing near the end of our time together. And so I have one question remaining for each of you. And if you could just be brief in your answer. So, Andrew, let me ask you this. What would it take for evangelicals to find common ground again on a candidate for president?
Well, goodness, that's a tough question. I would love a future where the biggest debates facing evangelicals and facing America more broadly were merely matters of tax rates. I would love if we were debating, matters of economics, not matters. Well, economics is a moral matter, yes, obviously, but matters of like urgent moral immediacy. The Bible doesn't necessarily give you a blueprint for free market capitalism, although I'm a free market capitalist. The Bible does give you a blueprint for the respecting the life of the individual, respecting the embodiment of maleness and femaleness. It gives you a mandate for respecting the definition of family, comprising of husband and wife. It deduces a right to the expression of religious freedom and truth seeking and truth speaking. And I wish we had a day where we were not debating matters of great moral urgency. But until that day comes, I think we're going to have a continued fraught evangelical landscape.
Thank you. So, Todd, let me go to you. If we have professing evangelicals who are in public support of the radical agenda of Harris, yet also claim to be conservative, Have we lost the definition of conservative?
Yeah. You wanted brief, brother. You wanted brief. Yes.
All right. Good deal. All right. So, Tom, let me go to you as we close. So, speak to the pastor. You being a pastor, speak to the pastor who's listening, whose congregation may have supplanted their hope for Jesus with the promise of a politician. What encouragement would you give him?
Well, I think we just have to constantly remind our churches that we lead, our congregants, that we got to constantly remember that our ultimate hope is in the return of Christ when he establishes his kingdom. And all of this should cause us to yearn for Christ's coming, because we know that these issues are complex. We're probably never going to get to where Andrew wishes, and I would concur with what he wishes. But we are to remind ourselves that we're to pray for thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So we're living as sojourners. That we've got to keep our eyes on Christ. We've got to live in this world in a way that's for the good of our nation, which would be allowing biblical principles to guide everything that we do, and making the church and even our daily lives about impacting people with the gospel. And the values of Christ's kingdom ought to be ruling our own lives first, our own homes, our own churches, because it's a sad thing when we want to think that changing our culture and changing our government is one thing, while we're allowing our own lives to not be surrendered to the true King, which is Jesus Christ. So we need to be looking for Christ's return, and we know that when he does come, and he will deal with the sin in this world, he will establish his eternally righteous kingdom, and therefore we got to remember that everyone who has this hope, 1 John says, purifies himself. And that's what we need to be reminded of, because we'll never find our hope in Washington, D.C. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned about what happens in Washington, D.C., but we've got to keep the perspective that Christ is our King.
Tom, thank you. Andrew and Todd, thank you as well. Gentlemen, really appreciate you sharing with us tonight and opening yourselves up for our viewers. I want to invite you, our viewers, to check out Dr. Andrew Walker's resource at fortisplus.org. Brave New World. It's a free resource for you, and I want to invite you to check that out. Also, check out fortisinstitute.org, and we will be having more of these in the future. You can become a Fortis insider and learn more about what's happening behind the scenes at Fortis Institute, and you will be made aware of additional webinars and resources that are going to be coming your way. So I want to invite you to sign up for that, and you'll find that at fortisinstitute.org. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Good night.
When I first found out I was pregnant, I remember the day. I have a 23-year-old. I don't want to do this all over again. And when I'm sitting there, the lady is giving me my ultrasound. When I first seen him, I was just like, can you tell if it's a boy or a girl? That's what I wanted to know. I was excited. Then she's like, it's 2. There was a difference. The girl was showing me my babies and everything on the monitor. I got to see it from my own eyes. Yeah, I'm happy now.